Since ancient times, a law has remained unshakable, forbidden, feared, and deeply misunderstood. The question is, why was blood, a symbol of life and death, declared inedible according to the Bible? A few have protected this mystery. Get ready to discover what you've never been told.
Shalom, shalom. Welcome once again to your channel, Mishnah TV, where this week we will be studying the parashiot of Tazria and Metzorah. And amidst the many commandments and themes presented in these biblical portions lies the prohibition against eating blood. This is one of those uncomfortable issues that runs throughout the entire Bible, yet almost no one truly dares to confront it. If the Torah permits the eating of meat, why is something as specific as blood prohibited in such a radical manner? This is no minor detail. It is not merely a dietary recommendation. It is a repeated, insistent, almost obsessive warning. From Genesis, even before the emergence of the people of Israel, all the way through Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the message remains the same, unwavering. You shall not eat the blood, for the blood is the life. And here, the mystery begins. For the Torah does not simply state that blood contains life. It asserts something far more radical. In Hebrew, it says, Ki hadam hu hanefesh, which means the blood is the life. It does not merely represent it. It does not merely symbolize it. It is it. Now then, if blood is life, then every time someone consumes it, what are they truly doing? Think about it for a moment. In many ancient cultures, drinking blood was considered a sacred act. It was believed that by doing so, one absorbed the animal's strength, its energy, even its very soul. It was power. It was a connection to the invisible realm. It was, in a certain sense, stealing life. And then the Torah arrives and completely shatters that paradigm. You do not absorb life. You do not consume it. You do not master it. Life, the Torah declares, does not belong to you. And here, the tension becomes even more fascinating. For the very thing that is absolutely forbidden for human consumption is precisely what God demands upon the altar. Blood is not to be drunk, it is to be offered. As the text states, I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. In other words, what man cannot take, he must give back. Life is not to be consumed, it is to be consecrated. And then, we come to understand something profoundly uncomfortable for the modern mindset. The problem is not the blood. The problem is the illusion of control over life. That is why, in Jewish law, every detail matters. The precise slaughter, the draining, the salting, the fire. These are not arbitrary rituals. They are constant reminders that even when you eat, you are interacting with something that was once alive. Even when you nourish yourself, you must remember that you are not the owner of life. And here, an even deeper interpretation comes into play. Maimonides would argue that this law serves to break with pagan practices. The Kabbalah would suggest something more unsettling, that within the blood dwell spiritual forces that man is not prepared to handle. Two distinct approaches, yet a single conclusion. Not everything you can do, you should do. And now, the question ceases to be merely ritualistic and becomes existential. How many times in life do we attempt to consume that which does not belong to us? To control that which we do not understand? To appropriate that which we ought only to respect? The prohibition against blood is not about food. It is about boundaries. It is about humility. It is about recognizing that life, your life, mine, the life of every living being, is not an object. It is alone. And he who grasps this ceases to live as an owner and begins to live as a custodian. And believe me, that changes everything. This is Abel Flores speaking. Thank you for studying with us. Remember to subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and don't forget to visit us at our website, lemishnah.com. There is an insistence in the Torah that, if one listens to it attentively, proves almost unsettling. It does not appear once. It does not appear twice. It repeats like an echo reverberating across generations, covenants, and distinct historical contexts. And the question is inevitable. Why such insistence? Let us begin at the source, at a moment when Israel did not yet exist, nor Sinai, nor any formal law. Only humanity. Only survivors of a shattered world. The Hebrew text states, "But flesh with its life, which is its blood, you shall not eat." This appears in Genesis 9 verse 4. In other words, it is a universal mandate given to Noah. It is not, in its origin, a Jewish law. It is a human law. And herein lies a revolutionary declaration. Even when man is permitted to eat meat, there remains an absolute boundary. You may take the flesh, but you may not touch the life. Let us move forward. Centuries later, within the context of the people of Israel, the warning is not merely repeated. It is intensified. In Leviticus 17 verses 10 to 11, we read something that sends a shiver down the spine. Any man who consumes any blood, I will set my face against that person. For the life, Nefesh, of the flesh is in the blood. Observe the phrasing. I will set my face against that person. This is no minor transgression. It is no mere oversight. It is a direct confrontation with the divine. And then, as if the Torah suspected that human beings would attempt to relativize this command, it insists once more in Deuteronomy 12 verse 23. Only be steadfast. Do not eat the blood, for the blood is the life. Be steadfast. As if it knew that here, precisely here, humanity would seek to negotiate. And now, let us pause. 3 distinct moments. 3 distinct contexts. One single, non-negotiable message. From Noah to Moses, the concept remains unchanged. Blood is life. It does not say it contains life. It does not say it represents life. It says it is. And when the Torah defines something as an essential identity, it is marking an ontological boundary, not merely a rule of conduct. That is why this prohibition is absolute. It does not depend on time. It does not depend on place. It does not depend on culture. It is a principle. And here arises the question that will accompany us throughout this entire class. If blood is life, and life belongs to God, then what does it truly mean for a human being to seek to consume it? That is the door we have just opened. And believe me, what lies behind it is not merely a law. It is a complete redefinition of what it means to be alive. If we were to condense this entire teaching into a single idea, it would be this. The Torah is not legislating a mere detail. It is defining a principle. For when we read attentively, we discover something surprising. The prohibition against blood does not begin with Israel. It begins with humanity. In Genesis, addressed to Noah, it establishes a universal standard. There is something within life that no human being may claim as their own. Then, in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, that same idea does not change. It deepens, it becomes more detailed, and it is safeguarded with almost surgical precision. In other words, it does not evolve. It is reaffirmed. And herein lies the key. We are not dealing with a secondary, cultural, or hygienic regulation. We are facing a spiritual boundary that the Torah is unwilling to negotiate. Blood is life, and life does not belong to man. Therefore, more than a prohibition, it is a declaration regarding the very nature of existence. There is a phrase in the Torah that seems simple, until one dares to take it literally. And when one does, everything changes. The blood is the life. It does not say it contains life. It does not say it transports life. It says, it is it. And here we enter a dimension that the modern mindset has completely forgotten. For to us, blood is biology. Red blood cells, oxygen, circulation. A system, a mechanism. But the Torah does not speak in laboratory terms. It speaks in terms of existence. Blood, it tells us, is the carrier of the Nefesh. And Nefesh is not simply life in the technical sense. It is breath, identity, living essence. It is the point where the physical and the spiritual meet. It is, to put it directly, the place where the body touches the soul. Therefore, blood is not just another fluid. It is a threshold. And now we understand something that, at first, may feel uncomfortable. If blood is life, then consuming it is not a neutral act. It is not simply a matter of nourishment. It is, in profound terms, an attempt to appropriate something that does not belong to us. For the Torah draws a very clear line. You may interact with creation, but you may not take ownership of its vital principle. Life, the text implies, is not the private property of human beings. It belongs to God. And here we enter into the theological implication, which is where everything becomes more serious. This prohibition is not sanitary. It is not because blood is bad for the body, nor is it cultural or merely some ancient, meaningless custom. It is metaphysical. Blood represents the vital principle that God breathes into matter. It is the tangible reminder that whatever we see as living did not give life to itself. Thus, when a human being chooses to consume blood, what they are doing, from this perspective, is crossing an invisible yet fundamental boundary. He is taking for himself that which he ought to recognize as sacred. He is altering the symbolic order of creation. And the Torah responds firmly, almost urgently, no, not everything that exists is available to be consumed. Not everything that lives can be reduced to an object. For when you turn life into something that can be ingested, you inevitably end up losing the capacity to revere it. And herein lies a teaching that transcends the law. The prohibition against blood is, at its core, an education of perception. It teaches you to view life not as a resource, but as a mystery, not as property, but as a loan. And whoever learns this begins to live in a different way, with greater restraint, with greater awareness, and curiously, with far greater respect for everything that is alive. There is something in the Torah that, if we do not look at it carefully, appears to be a contradiction. And not a minor contradiction either, but a profound, almost provocative paradox. On the one hand, the prohibition is absolute. You shall not eat the blood. But on the other hand, that very same blood is the central element of the service at the altar. How can it be that what is forbidden for man is obligatory before God? Listen to the text in Hebrew, for here every word carries weight. For the blood is what atones for the soul. Thus declares Leviticus 17 verse 11. I have given it to you upon the altar to atone for your souls. Pause at that phrase. I have given it to you. The blood is not yours. You do not produce it in an absolute sense. You do not possess it. It is given to you for a specific purpose. And that purpose is not consumption. It is atonement. Here lies the key to the entire paradox. Blood, precisely because it represents life, cannot be used in just any manner. It cannot be degraded to the level of mere food. It cannot be appropriated as if it were just another object. It can only be directed toward the sacred. It can only be returned to its source. And thus, we grasp the logic the Torah is constructing, a logic that profoundly challenges the human mindset. Man tends to consume, to appropriate, to integrate everything into himself. But the Torah introduces a radical boundary. There are things that are not integrated. They are elevated. There are things that are not absorbed. They are offered. Blood belongs to that category. That is why, at the altar, blood is not drunk. It is poured out. It is not retained. It is surrendered. It is not used to nourish the body, but to mend the soul. And here emerges an idea that transforms our entire understanding of sacrifice. Sacrifice is not destruction. It is restitution. It is returning life to the one who bestowed it. Therefore, that which would be a transgression at the table becomes holiness at the altar, not because the substance changes, but because the direction changes. And this is the teaching that the Torah seeks to engrave upon our consciousness. Blood cannot be appropriated by man, for it represents something that transcends him. It can only be returned to God. And from this is born a phrase that encapsulates all this tension, all this depth. Life is not consumed. It is consecrated. And now, the question ceases to be ritual and becomes personal. What do you do with the life that has been given to you? Do you consume it, or do you consecrate it? For, in the end, we are not speaking merely of blood. We are speaking of the direction of your existence. Up to this point, the Torah has given us the principle. But Judaism does something fascinating. It takes that absolute principle and translates it into everyday life. For an idea, if it does not become practical, remains mere philosophy, and the Torah never remains mere philosophy. Thus is born halakha, the lived law. And here, something occurs that reveals the almost surgical precision of Jewish thought. Not all blood is treated equally, and this is not a contradiction. It is a deepening. First, the most evident category, the blood of mammals and birds. Here, there is no ambiguity. It is completely forbidden. Not partially, not symbolically. Totally. And it is not enough simply to avoid drinking it directly. The law demands something far more rigorous, that it be removed before the meat is consumed. In other words, even when eating something permitted, one must ensure that that which represents life has been removed. Why? Because contact with life demands responsibility. Now, halakha introduces a distinction that surprises many. The blood of fish is permitted. And here, one might ask, is there not life in a fish? Of course there is. But in halakhic terms, it is not considered nefesh, soul/life force, in the same sense as it is in land animals or birds. This is not biology. It is applied ontology. The Torah and tradition are classifying levels of life, levels of the soul's manifestation within the physical world. And this compels us to think in a more sophisticated manner. Not all life expresses itself in the same way. And therefore, not every interaction with life falls under the same legal framework. Finally, there is an even more delicate category, human blood. Here, the principle is clear, it is forbidden. Yet halakha recognizes something interesting. It does not fall under the same strict legal category as animal blood intended for consumption. Why? Because the human being does not exist within the same system of consumption as animals. A human is not food. A human is not an object. A human is a subject. And here, silently, the law introduces a moral hierarchy. Not everything that is forbidden for the same reason, nor with the same intensity. And then we begin to see the beauty of the system. Halakha is not an arbitrary list of rules. It is a cartography of reality. It teaches you to distinguish. It teaches you to discern nuances. It teaches you not to live in black and white. For life itself is not uniform. And here emerges a profoundly contemporary teaching. We live in an era that oversimplifies everything, good or bad, permitted or forbidden, black or white. But the Torah compels you to refine your perception, to understand that there are levels, categories, and nuances, and that holiness is often found precisely in the ability to distinguish. For ultimately, it is not merely about what you may or may not eat. It is about how you learn to view the world. And whoever learns to see with precision inevitably begins to live with greater awareness. And that is the true intention of halakha. We now arrive at a point where the Torah ceases to be merely an idea and becomes a discipline. For if blood represents life, then simply knowing this is not enough. One must act accordingly. And here appears the precision of halakha, Jewish law, which leaves no room for improvisation. It is not enough to simply avoid visible blood. It must be extracted, removed, and treated with a technical reverence that borders on the sacred. The first method is shechita, ritual slaughter. It is not merely a simple method of slitting the throat. It is an act of almost millimeter-perfect precision. A clean, precise cut, made in the exact right spot, with the appropriate instrument. The objective? To facilitate the maximum possible drainage of blood. For even in the very moment of taking a life, the law demands mindfulness. It is not uncontrolled violence. It is a regulated, contained, almost surgical act. Next comes the second process, melika, salting. Here, the meat undergoes a procedure that, at first glance, appears purely culinary, yet is, in reality, profoundly spiritual. First, it is washed. Then, it is thoroughly covered with salt. It is left to rest, allowing the blood to seep out, slowly. And finally, it is rinsed. It is a process of extraction, as if the law were declaring, even after death, life remains present, and it must be treated with care. And then we encounter the third method, sli, roasting directly over an open fire. This is particularly necessary for the liver, an organ saturated with blood. Here, salt alone is insufficient. Only fire can complete the process. And the symbolism is powerful. Fire transforms. Fire purifies. Fire reveals what lies hidden, as if certain levels of life could only be processed through a greater intensity. And so, after all these processes, halakha establishes an absolute, non-negotiable rule. If the meat has not been kashered, it may not be consumed. There are no shortcuts. There are no convenient exceptions. For this is not about culinary technique. It is about spiritual awareness applied to everyday life. And here lies the idea that transforms everything. Kosher cooking is not merely a diet. It is a discipline of perception. It compels you to pause, to process, to remember, even in the most basic of acts, eating, that you are interacting with something that once lived. And in a world where everything is consumed quickly, without thought, halakha introduces pause. It introduces process. It introduces reverence. For ultimately, it is not just about removing the blood from the meat. It is about removing indifference from the heart. And whoever achieves that no longer eats the same way. They live differently. Here, the Torah ceases to merely hint and begins to speak in terms of consequences. For the consumption of blood is not presented as a minor error, nor as a technical infraction. The Torah itself links it to one of the most severe sanctions, coherent, spiritual excision. That is to say, a profound disconnection between the human being and his source. And this compels us to understand something with absolute clarity. We are not dealing with a simple dietary rule. We are facing a transgression that affects the very relationship between man and God. For this reason, the rabbinic tradition is not content merely to reiterate the prohibition. It surrounds it with layers of protection, rigorous inspection of the meat, strict preparation processes, constant supervision, what we know today as kashrut. Why such meticulous care? Because the objective is not merely to avoid the obvious, but even the residual, that which is almost invisible. The law places no trust in improvisation when it comes to life itself. And herein lies a silent, yet powerful lesson. The more valuable a principle is, the more safeguards it requires to be protected. And life, represented by the blood, is, precisely, the most valuable thing of all. Now, something fascinating occurs here. The very same prohibition is viewed from completely different angles, and yet they all converge upon a single warning. On one hand, we have the rational approach, represented by Maimonides. He observes the historical context and tells us the consumption of blood was common in pagan cults. It was believed that by drinking it, you absorbed life, power, and even that you could communicate with spiritual forces. Thus, the Torah does not merely prohibit, it separates. It disengages Israel from a world where the sacred was intermingled with the dark. On the other hand, Kabbalah offers a deeper reading and a more unsettling one. Blood contains vital energy, yes, but it can also harbor disordered forces, what the sages call dinim, severe judgments. Consuming it is not a neutral act. It can open doors that you may not know how to close. And finally, the ethical approach, perhaps the one closest to our daily lives. The prohibition cultivates sensitivity. Even when you eat meat, it compels you to remember that life once resided there, that you are not consuming an object, but rather something that once lived. Three approaches, rational, mystical, ethical, and all three, at their core, tell you the same thing. Life is not something to be used, it is something to be respected. And now, after traversing this entire journey, we can see the complete picture. The prohibition against blood is not an isolated detail. It is an architecture. On a theological level, it reminds us of something essential. Life belongs to God. It is not a resource. It is a gift. On a ritual level, it establishes a clear boundary. Blood is not consumed. It is elevated. Its place is solely at the altar. On an ethical level, it cultivates our sensitivity. It compels us not to become indifferent toward life, even in the most mundane of daily acts. And on an identity level, it draws a frontier. It sets Israel apart from practices in which life was manipulated, absorbed, or even profaned. Yet all of this converges upon a single idea, an idea that redefines existence. The prohibition against blood is not about diet. It is about perception. It is not about what enters your mouth, but about how you understand life. For he who views life as an object ultimately consumes it. But he who recognizes it as sacred learns to honor it. And there, precisely there, begins a completely different way of living. This has been Abel Flores, founding journalist of Law Mishnah TV. Thank you so much for studying with us. Remember to subscribe, give us a like, and visit us at our website, lemishnah.com. Here are a couple of videos so you can continue studying with us. Shalom.